And here we go. So we're having a 4-part series, which you all hopefully were aware of. This is the intro. We'll be covering really some basics here, just some terminology, some fundamental understanding of characteristics of data. Session 2 in 2 weeks will be about different types of charts and how to interpret them. Session 3 will really be focused on the ArtsEd project in particular, looking at our data, what we can and cannot say with it. And then session 4 is going to be about how to be really good critical thinkers with data. How do we note when something has been presented inappropriately? And how do we be aware of times when people are maybe trying to manipulate us to think about the data in a certain way? So we'll talk about those things in session 4. So I want to start with this quote here, because I think it's really important that anybody who is maybe a little intimidated by the idea of working with data, because I know we're not all data people, is that it's really not about the math aspect. There is math in data literacy. Sometimes a number has been aggregated or it has been calculated, or we might want to do some calculations, but ultimately it's not about that. It's certainly not for this course. I will set your mind at ease if you're worried about that. We're not going to be doing analyses in this course. Really, it's about this life skill of being able to work with data, understand data, interpret data effectively, and then share it out with others. So let's talk a little bit about what is data. So I put this definition together from a couple of different sources, and I like this idea of these 2 parts. So first of all, it's this collection of something, whether you think of that as a fact or information or an observation, collection of these pieces that we then use in some way. So it's not just data for the sake of data. We're actually using it to make decisions, or we're calculating with it, or we're having a discussion about it, or it's used to inform our next steps. So data in use of something. And when we think about what is data, you probably think of numbers right away, and that's certainly an important part of data, but it's broader than that. Data can also be words and text. Data can be images. Data can be audio files. It can be recordings. In fact, data can come from all of these different sources and many more. And there's so many different ways we can get data and use data, but I think maybe that's part of why it's important to work on some of these skills, because it does come from so many different places. So I don't know if you thought of an X-ray or an MRI as a data source, but it is. I mean, that's how it tells the doctors that there might be a problem here if they see something on the X-ray. For this project, unfortunately, we don't have access to a lot of these cool different types of data. We are pretty much just getting administrative records at this point. You all probably have access to assessment data in your work, and we hope to get there with this project too, and be able to link student assessments to their ArtsEd participation, but we're not quite there yet. So we're mostly just dealing with records. But I just wanted to point out that data can come from all of these different places. So specifically thinking about the skills of data literacy, there are a lot of different people who teach data literacy and who have great blog posts and books, and there's lots of resources out there on data literacy, and different people approach it in different ways. I really liked these particular 6 skills. I felt like they were really relevant to this project. So these are the 6 that I want to focus on. And we're just going to talk about each of these a little bit. And I have an example of a typical student-related data that we're going to use to walk through each of the 6. So the first one, the skill of location, is about where do I find relevant information? And we're talking about locating it in 2 different ways. So first is just, where do I source this data from? Which dashboard do I look at? Which report do I use? Which white paper? Which appendix of this report? So you got to find where to even get the data first of all. And then once you find it, it's locating where exactly should I be looking? Which bar of this bar chart is the one that answers my question? Or which cell of this data table is the one that I need? And so being able to pinpoint where to even start looking for the data, you may not think of that as a skill, but it actually is. People who do not have much data literacy and who have not been trained in data might look at a table like this and just be completely overwhelmed. There's so much going on here. Where do I even start? What does this mean? And so we would use our location skill to narrow in on where we want to focus in this table. So if we had a question like the one you see at the top, what proportion of the 4th grade girls tested as less than proficient? We would use that location skill to start zeroing in on where to look in the table. So, okay, 4th grade girls, I want to make sure I'm looking in the 4th grade row. The girls, so I want to make sure I'm looking at the females. Proportion, okay, so I want to make sure I'm looking for the percentage. Less than proficient. Well, here you have to have a little bit of knowledge about the content area. So you have to know, if you see the word proficient, what does less than that mean? So in this case, we're talking about the 2 levels below, or in this case, above in the table, proficient, basic, and below basic. So you put all those pieces together, and that tells you where in this table to locate the two cells that we need in order to answer our question. So that is the location skill. First, we had to find the table. Maybe it was buried in an appendix in the back of a 100-page report. That happens. But once you get there, then you have to find the data within the table. So then skill 2 is understanding what it is that you're seeing. So we found the right cells, but what is that actually telling us? So we might want a little bit of context here. So we're talking about 4th grade girls, but is this the 4th grade girls in our state, in our district, in our school, in a particular classroom? So we might look to other aspects of the presented data. Maybe there's a footnote underneath the table. Hopefully, wherever you're getting your data from, the source information tells you some of those details about where the data are sourced from, but you can also glean some of that just by looking at the other data elements. So if we notice here, we're talking about only 63 4th graders, we're definitely not talking about our state. We're probably not even talking about our district, maybe a school, if it's a small school, maybe just a classroom. So that's another piece of data literacy, is being able to kind of use the clues around you to help better understand the data that you're looking at. And then what does it mean, those two numbers, if we're talking about this proportion? Well, we'd add those together and get 32.4%. So that's the answer to our question. 32.4% of the 4th grade girls in this school, we'll say this is a school, tested as less than proficient. All right. What do we do with that? What does that actually mean? And why should we care about this number? So now we have to interpret that finding. Well, if almost a third of the students, the 4th grade girls, are not proficient, that doesn't sound like a very good result, does it? We probably want our students to be proficient on whatever this is they're being tested on. Maybe this is their standardized math test. Maybe it's their science test. Maybe it's proficiency with their instrument, however you want to think about that. Whoops. And so we would want to we would want to interpret, what is 33%? Is this good? Is it bad? How does this relate to what we were expecting? How does this relate to our goal? And then that context will help us better understand this number as well. So one thing we might want to do is further analyze the data. And I don't necessarily mean doing additional math on it, although sometimes that is a part of data literacy. But it might just mean, let's keep asking questions about this data so we really understand what it is that we're seeing, and especially what are the implications of this and what should we be doing about this data information, if anything. And so the skill of being able to ask follow-up questions is a really important one. And I know that this is a big part of the project. You all will see something in your dashboards and you'll ask yourselves or each other or us, hey, I noticed this. What does this mean? Or why am I seeing this trend for this group but not for this group? That's an analysis skill, and you probably have more of that than you may even realize. So back to our table here, we found our value. So one thing we might want to question is, all right, here's what it looks like for the 4th grade girls. How does that compare to the 4th grade boys? How does that compare to the 5th graders? How does that compare to last year or the year before? How does it compare to our neighboring district? So there's all of these different additional questions we might ask of this data to put the finding that we have in context and understand, is this a good result, a bad result, something we need to do something about or not? So that questioning is that analysis skill. And then the 5th skill is really about being able to share those insights that you've obtained from data with other people. So you may not be able to share the exact table, or maybe you're trying to give a report out to somebody else or just inform somebody. And for you to be able to take what you saw in numeric form and interpret it in a way that helps them understand it is another skill. So maybe in this example, we might summarize that data like this. So we might say that almost a third of the 4th grade girls, let's say we did identify our data source and we knew that this was a particular school, Shady Oak Elementary, they tested as less than proficient in math this year. And then we bring in those analysis skills. Although that's better than the rate for the 4th grade boys and for the 5th graders, it's worse than last year's rate. So now we've taken this table of numbers, the questions we asked of it, we looked at the whole table, what we know about proficiency, and we've explained this to somebody else. And then the last skill goes back to our definition of data. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to use this data in some important way? What is our next step with this information? Is knowing the information all we need? Do we want to just monitor this? Maybe it was a really good result and we don't need to do anything except keep an eye on it. Maybe it's something we want to celebrate because we achieved a goal that we hadn't achieved before. So we want to probably do something with this information. And so maybe in this particular case, we would take what we interpreted in the data and how we analyzed it, and we would make a recommendation. I would suggest that we review the math curriculum for our 4th and 5th graders to make sure that this math is being covered sufficiently. Or maybe we would recommend that we put more resources towards this because this has been an ongoing problem for many years. So depending on the results of your analysis and what you find out, will change the recommendations that you would make based on the result. So I know that was a little bit quick, but I just wanted to kind of introduce this idea of what are some of these skills that we probably already have to some degree or another, and how does that look in practice when you're working with a data table or a chart or however you might be approaching the data. So a couple of things I want to talk about in terms of why we want to have these skills. So you probably already recognize there is value in data literacy because you're here. But this is from a longer list that I will share with you in the Slack channel, so you can look at their full listing later if you want. But these two really stood out to me. I think having data literacy skills makes it much easier to know, okay, what is the result of this? What is this really telling me? If you don't have that skill, you might look at a statistic or a table or a chart and not even really know what it is that you're seeing. And then most importantly, how do you apply that to your work? What should our next step be? What is our goal with this? What can we adjust to make this better? And even your personal life. So we use data in our personal lives all the time. Should I refinance my mortgage? Should I invest my money with this firm? Lots of ways that we use data, and being able to work with it appropriately helps us make better decisions. Conversely, if we don't have these skills, we might not really know what we should do next. So if we just have a number and we don't really understand how that number fits in the context of our setting, then we might not really know what, if anything, we should be doing about it. And then tying into session 4, if you don't understand the data that you're looking at, you don't really know if it's a good representation of the data. Is this accurate? Has it been manipulated? Should I pay attention to this? Should I tell other people about this? Or would I be spreading misinformation? And data literacy will help us identify when that has happened so that we don't spread misinformation or rely on it ourselves. All right, so that's a little bit about the skills. Next, I want to start talking a little bit more in depth about some of the terms that you might hear related to data, some of the types, and then especially the granularity. And for those of you who are in this class before, you know why I have this slide of these little plants growing, but I'll just say for the rest of you, I tried a couple of different backgrounds and trying to come up with a metaphor that I felt like fit this class. And I settled on this gardening one because I like to garden. I grow a lot of my own food. My husband and I have lots of gardens that we're currently watering like crazy because we've had no rain. And I just really love this idea that we are all growing a garden of data literacy. Some of you may already have a pretty substantial garden, and you're here because you just want to really increase the yield of your tomato plants or something. And some of you may be at the beginning and we're helping you put in those seeds, or you have your seeds in, but we're helping you water it. Whatever that might look like in terms of how far along your plants are, I think it's really cool to think about. Data literacy isn't something you have and you're done. It's something that you can continue to grow and get better at and have more practice at, and even more confidence. So maybe you have the skills, but you just don't have that confidence. And hopefully this course will help you with that too. So let's start talking about these different types of data. You've probably heard these terms, even if you're not super comfortable with them, but there's quantitative data, which are data that you express as a number. And it's typically data that you would receive in answer to questions like these: how much of something, how many, how often, when. So an arts question might be, how many arts courses did Laura take this year? Or how many instruments does Kevin play? On the other hand, qualitative data is expressed in words. So it's usually something that's descriptive or just categories of things, but it's usually in response to questions like, what has happened? Or why did this happen? So in your Arts Ed dashboard, you may see a trend. Maybe, just hypothetically speaking, we might have seen a lot of drop off in arts education teachers. And so you might ask, why has this happened in this district? Or why did this happen in this district, but not in this other one? And so those why questions can really only be answered with a qualitative response. You want to have words that explain that to you. So let's do a little activity together. I've got these 4 questions up here, and I want you to tell me, would the answer to this question be quantitative or would it be qualitative? So go ahead and unmute if you're willing to play along and just call it out. If I asked how many students are in concert band and in jazz band, is that quantitative or qualitative?
Quantitative.
Quantitative, perfect. There's a specific number that we're looking for here. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 50, whatever that might be, it's numeric. All right, how about the next one? Where did Dr. Martin get his teaching degree?
Qual.
Yes, qualitative. It's some school or institution. It's words, so that's qualitative. Which school does Mark attend?
Qualitative.
Right, same idea, qualitative. It's going to be a place that Mark goes. How about this last one? How much does Rena like to draw?
Depends if you're getting a written response or a Likert scale.
Oh my gosh, what a sophisticated answer. Yes, exactly right. This is it depends when I put this one in here on purpose. So I said generally the how many and how much questions are quantitative. Generally true, but it's not a hard and fast rule because it does depend on how you solicit the answer. So you could ask, how much does Rena like to draw, and get an answer back like a lot, or it's her absolute favorite thing. And that would be qualitative. But if you gave it on a scale, say from 1 to 10, how much does she like to draw? Now you're getting a quantitative response. So yes, that one could be either or, depending on the way you ask the question or the way that you provide the response options you're looking for. So qualitative data, the words, can be further divided into these two types. So the responses either are nominal, meaning there's no inherent rank order to them. So they can be sorted still. So if we think about something like a county name or school names or district names, we can put those in alphabetical order, but there's nothing inherently ranked about that. Just because a school comes later in the alphabet than another school doesn't tell you any properties about that school itself. On the other hand, ordinal data is ranked in a particular order. So you see the example here of a typical survey response scale: disagree, neutral, and agree. That's a very particular order. We would all agree that these go one after the other. It would look weird to have disagree, agree, neutral. Or you might have a different scale type that's a lot, somewhat, not at all, also in an orderly fashion. So if you wanted to ask a question about arts education or arts ed courses or something in our area here, and you wanted to get a nominal response, what's something that you could ask?
Could be something about like where they study,
Mhm.
location kind of question.
Sure. Where do you do most of your study? Where do you practice your instrument? Right? They could say, well, sometimes it's in the kitchen, sometimes the basement. There's no ranking to those answers. What about an ordinal? How would we ask something about the arts and want to receive an ordinal answer?
Whether or not you have enough funding.
Whether or not you have enough funding. Okay, so what response options would we give to get an ordinal answer for that one?
Maybe like something like I receive not enough, or too much, even though that would be insane.
Nobody would choose that, right? Yeah, that would work. If there's a clear order to those response options, that works. I like that. Very good. Okay, the next topic we're going to talk about is data granularity, or the grain of the data, also known as the level of detail of the data. It's really just this idea of what does a record or a row in this data set represent? And we can think of a couple of examples here. So if we take a little basic table like this one, we're looking at these different schools, and we maybe know a lot of different characteristics about the school. We know which district it's in. We know who the principal is. We know where it's located geographically. We know how many students are in it. The grain of that table is at the school level. So we don't know anything about the specifics of the students. We only know things about the school. But we could also go a little bit deeper with the data and get something that's more granular at the course level. So now we not only know which school these courses are in, we actually know some things about the courses themselves. Is this a semester-long course or a year-long course? Who's teaching this course? How many students are in it? What level of course is this? Is this for beginners or intermediates or whatever? Or we can keep going deeper yet, down to the student level. So now we could think about one record in our data is a particular student and things that we know about that student. What grade is that student in? What gender is that student? Which school is the student in? Where is that school located? So a more granular table can still have the elements of the more aggregated table. We might also know all the courses the student is in and what school that is, and whether or what proportion of the students in the school are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So just because it's a granular table doesn't mean we don't also have information about the higher levels of aggregation. It just means what is that row of data representing? A student, a course, a school, the district. So you can think of it as kind of this continuum idea from more aggregated to more granular, or you can also think of it as kind of a pyramid. So aggregated data is generally fewer rows, smaller data set, not as much detail or richness. But then as we get more and more granular, you can kind of think of it as widening out our pyramid. We're getting more information, bigger, broader picture. So let's go through some examples of that. But first, I just want to mention that the grain of the table may not be obvious at first, just depending on how things are arranged. So if we look back at this table we used earlier with our different data literacy skills, what would we say the grain of this data is? Is this school level? It's not school level, because we know more than just what school they're in. Is it grade level? Some maybes. We do know what grade they're in, so we're getting closer, but we know more than that, don't we? We know not just that they're in grade 4, we also know a little bit about their gender, the students. We also know how they scored on the test. So it's more granular than just grade level. But is it all the way down to student level? Would we say this is a student level grain of table, just based on what we're seeing here? I see some head shakes. No, it's not, because although we know the number of students in each of these groups, we don't know which students. I don't have the ability to say who these 2 females who scored below basic in the 4th grade were. So the grain of our table is something like the proficiency level by student gender, but it's not all the way down to the student level. Often what happens is the data table that we're wanting is not as granular as what we had hoped for. And so we just have to work with what we've got. So we can talk about the numbers and the percents at the proficiency level, but we can't talk about individual students. But sometimes it's the other way around. Maybe your question wasn't about females or males. Your question was about 4th graders. And if you got this table or found this table, and let's say the totals weren't in there, you would have to do some aggregation yourself to get the answer that you're looking for. So in that case, you would take your, let's say you wanted to know the 4th graders who were not proficient. So you would have to add up your females who were not and your males who were not and divide by the total number of students. So you'd be taking a more granular data table and aggregating it with math to get to the level you want. I know it's a little bit of a complex concept. I'm bringing this up because it's really important in Arts Ed data, the data project, because there are things that we would like to be able to do that if the data are too aggregated, we just can't. It's much easier if you have really granular data to add it up or do the math to get up to a higher level of aggregation. You can't go the other way. I can't pick this apart at the student level if it's not already provided. So we'll talk in just a couple of minutes about why that student level data is so valuable. But first, let's do another example about this idea of granularity. So these are real data from one of our Arts Ed states. And we're looking at 2 things related to each other, the number of arts teachers and the number of overall students. And if we look at this at the state level, so if the grain of our data is just the state, we only have the 1 data point, and it's really not that helpful. There isn't anything much we can say about teachers and students and relationship together. We just know what that intersection is. But if we start getting more granular data, such as down to the county level, now we can start to see some patterns. We have a lot more data points to work with. And we see here a fairly strong positive trend. The more students we have, the more teachers we have, and vice versa, which makes perfect sense. Who's going to teach all these students? We need more teachers. We get more granular yet, down to district. We have even more data points. Now we have 330 of them. And now we see not only that general positive trend, but at least to me, it's looking like we might have two groups here. We've got this group with a more steeper slope that they have an even stronger relationship between teachers and students. So we're getting a little bit into graph interpretation here too. And we've got this kind of other distribution down here where it's still a positive relationship, but it's not quite as strong. And we couldn't have seen that at the county level, and certainly not at the state level. It really takes that more granular data to start to identify a little bit more depth with these trends and patterns. And then if we get down to the school level, not only do we have a lot more data points and this even clearer trend down here, it means we can start to do even more things with the data. So here I've color-coded each of these dots, which represents 1 school, by the number of arts disciplines that school offers. And that just wouldn't make any sense to do at the district level or the county level, or obviously not at the state level. This is a school level characteristic. How many disciplines does the school offer? And now we can look for even more patterns. So this is that analysis skill of really interrogating the data and asking further questions. So you might want to notice, where are these schools that have the most number of disciplines? And yeah, there's some buried under here, but it's looking like they're generally out here towards this end, where the more students you have, the more disciplines are offered, which makes sense. And that's an interesting finding that we wouldn't have been able to see with that more aggregated data. So if we think of all four of these together, remember that continuum from aggregated to granular, or that pyramid, to kind of make this Z pattern, the way I've arranged them here. More aggregated, a little more granular again, and the most granular of the options that we have here. And then we could go even further down and actually look at individual students, which is what we would love to be able to do for all of your states. So we have 2 states so far, Minnesota and Virginia, that have provided student level data. And it just gives us so much more ability to really dig in and answer important questions. So we can answer things like this. What does that arts enrollment rate look like for Black female students who are also English learners? Or pick any group you're interested in. What about male students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, who are also, Hispanic, or whatever group makes sense. If we have all that student level detail, we can look at those kinds of things and just see a much richer picture of what arts education looks like in your counties and your districts and your schools at whatever level we want, as long as we have the granular data. Or really exciting, we can start looking at what does this look like over time, or what does it look like within a particular student's history? So do the students who take math also take arts? Do the students who take drama also take dance? So we can look at those intersections of courses as well as the characteristics of the students if we have student level data. So we know that this student takes these courses, and not just this course has this many students in it. Or where we would love to get with this project and are not able to yet, as I mentioned earlier, we only have certain types of records, but we would love to start getting assessment records and other outcomes related to your students, so that we can look at these relationships between things like their attendance rate, or their on-time graduation rate, or their performance on standardized tests, or their grades, their GPA, and their participation in the arts. Several of you mentioned that you're interested in advocacy work, or you do advocacy. What a powerful statement you'd be able to make if we did see that there's a relationship between these positive outcomes and participation in the arts. Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet, but student level data with those data variables included would allow us to look at those relationships and answer those questions. Also, we can look at things better over time. So right now we can say, what is the arts enrollment rate in each year? But we don't know if that's the same students participating in that rate or not. Wouldn't it be really cool to see what proportion of freshmen are still in the arts by the time they're seniors? Or coming at it from the other direction, what proportion of seniors stayed in the arts all through their middle school and high school years? Those would be really interesting things to know. And we can do that with student level data. All right, so what we covered today, we covered those 6 basic data literacy skills pretty briefly, I know, but just giving you a taste of what are the kinds of things we're talking about. We say, what is data literacy? We talked about those different ways data can reach us, or the different formats it can take: text, images, maps, x-rays, etc., and where those come from. Again, we mostly just get records for this project, may get to maybe a teacher survey down the road. I know there's a lot of interest in having more teacher related data. So maybe some of that would include actually surveying teachers, or maybe students who are about to receive their teaching certificates or something like that. Or maybe those assessment records. We talked a bit about the different data types, quantitative versus qualitative, and how qualitative data can either be inherently ordered, not enough funding, adequate funding, more funding than we know what to do with, right? That one's going to stick with me. I love that example. Or nominal. It just is just as a description. There's no inherent order. If we did a poll of everybody's hair color in this group, right, there's just no ordering to blonde or brunette or black or what, all the different options. It's just, they're just descriptors. There's no ordering to those. And then we spend quite a bit of time talking about granularity, because that's a really key piece of the data project and what we can and cannot do with the data based on how granular it is. So I'm going to pause there. And since I went through all that kind of quickly, I have not been able to monitor the chat very well. Let me just check that real quick. Also, just pause and see if there are any particular questions that we can address right now. Feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself, or I am bringing my chat window over here. Ah, Todd, I missed your puppy. We may have to get a picture, get to see your picture too. No questions. Okay. Anyone? All right, then, sorry, hid my Zoom controls on myself here. There we go. Okay, so then between each of our sessions, we have our 4 sessions where we'll all meet at the same time. I'll go through content, but in between, I think it can be really helpful for you to just keep things fresh, learn a little bit more, maybe dig a little bit deeper in something we didn't go into a lot of in class. So I have well, I don't want to call it homework, but I have a learning opportunity for you in between each of our sessions. So before we meet again in 2 weeks, what I'd like for you to do is watch this 10-minute video. It's pretty brief. This whole series that Arizona State University and Crash Course did together is really well done. I think there's 12 or 14 different videos, something like that. And they're all really interesting. I've seen about half of them. So feel free to watch them all if you're really into it, but at least for next time, if you could watch the first one. So it talks about what is data literacy. You'll hear some of the things that I talked about today, but they do also go into some of the terms that you might want to just get a little familiar with, like mean and median and mode, and just some of those phrases that maybe if it's been a while since you were in school yourself and you don't use it in your day-to-day, might just be good for a refresher. She does talk pretty quickly. So if you're having a little bit of trouble processing what she's saying and really absorbing it and keeping up, you may want to just go into your settings on YouTube and adjust that playback speed to 0.75 or 0.8 or whatever works for you. Or you can just listen to it a few times. But I just wanted to give you that heads up that she does speak quickly. I can relate. I also am a fast talker, but at least in her case, you can adjust that speed. But yeah, I would encourage you to watch the video. I think they're great. And then when we meet again in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about charts and graphs. I'm going to invite you all to that Slack site. So if you see a chart or graph that you want to prep us with in the meantime, you can put that there. If you have questions, put that there. I would love this to be an ongoing conversation and community that we all have together, not just necessarily in the 4 hours when we're specifically meeting. Let's be a resource to each other. Let's all grow our gardens and support each other in our data literacy. But that is our session for today. So thank you all so much for being here. And if you found this super basic, that is okay. Like I said, we're trying to cover everybody. Sorry, still working with all my windows here. Trying to cover something for everybody. The next few sessions won't be this basic. So if it was, great. And maybe it's just a little confidence, but yeah, I know this, I got this, which is great. And if you discover at some point this really isn't for you, then that's up to you too. And, show up when you find it valuable. And hopefully you do, because we love having you all here and having you all be part of this group. So see you in 2 weeks, if not before. Enjoy the early days of summer. This is such a great time of year. And I will see you all for our next session. Thanks, everybody.